You know, my first project was a disaster. I went out and I got a jogging suit pattern. It had multiple colors on it. It was really, really cute, but I totally messed it up. In fact, do you know that episode of The Cosby Show where Theo wanted a designer shirt and Vanessa was like, you know what? Don't even worry about it. I can make you a shirt. And then it turned out like this. Yeah, that was me. My project looked exactly like that picture, and I was very discouraged by it. So I sat it down, I put it in my closet, never to look at it again, and I just was like, this is not for me. But then when I picked up the sewing machine again, I just went out and got a new pattern, an easier pattern, and I just practiced on that one pattern. I probably made at least 3 or 4 of the same dress just to practice my skills, just to see how the different fabrics work with this design. And I got really good at it. And I, lo and behold, started turning out garments like this one. And this one is one that I recently made. It is a New Look design N6774. So if you would like to see how I made this beautiful dress, then stay tuned to Modestly Made. Greetings, sis. It's me, Sister Joanna Wade, and thank you for joining me here on Modestly Made. By no means am I a professional seamstress or teacher, but I have learned a lot about sewing that I would like to share with you today to help in your sewing journey. So let's talk about New Look N6774. So this particular pattern is a very modest little girl's pattern, a dress, and it comes a little bit below the knee. However, to maintain the modesty of the model, I am going to extend this dress. It comes in 2 different views. One has lace lines in the front as a decorative thing, and the other doesn't. It just has the buttons that are there. So this is a really nice little outfit for our model. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure we plan the project. So certain things within the project we want to do, certain things that we don't want to do. This is what you would think to yourself and make note of, maybe even on the pattern piece or on the instructions itself. So our plan for this dress is first and foremost to lengthen the skirt by 2 sizes. So I am going to do a little bit of pattern grading here, lengthening the skirt from a size 6 waist to a size 8 length, because as you can see in the pattern, you're going to see different lengths for the sizes. They want to maintain that this dress length is below the knee. We don't want to do that. The next thing that we want to plan is our pre-serged items. What items are we planning to pre-serge, meaning serge it before we even sew it in this garment? So our pre-serge items consist of our bodice back edge. That's where the zipper is going to lie, on the bodice in the back. Also, the skirt back edge where the zipper is going to align. So I want to clean up those salvage edges there so that they don't fray and I don't have to come back and try to do it after I install the zipper, because it's a lot harder to clean up those seams when you have attached zipper already. So we want to do those first. The instructions also let you know to do that. So our next thing is that what are we going to post serge? So our post serge items are going to be the bodice. I want you to see how the instructions tell you to construct this dress and how to deal with the seams, and also how I choose to deal with them. So in the bodice, I am going to serge every time I join two pieces together and make a seam. So I'm going to serge those for the bodice, but for the skirt, I'm going to lay them flat like it says to do in the instructions. So ironing them flat to the garment, and also like the edge of where those seams end is going to be sewn up into the other seams of the dress, whether it's the bodice or the hem. Our next planned item is the seam finish. Like I said, some of the seams I'm going to serge the seams together to create that strength, and some of them I'm going to lay flat. Also, this includes the pockets. Usually I will serge the pockets, but instead of doing that, I'm going to do it like the instructions say and just notch the pockets so you can see how that looks as opposed to a serged edge. Next, with the seam finish, is going to be the seam direction. So I default in the direction I have my seams, meaning when you have a seam and you have another piece that is going to be sewn to that seam or sewn across that seam, you want to determine in what direction you're going to sew the seam. So I default to sewing to the back, but there is exceptions to that rule. One exception is pockets. So pockets, when you sew them into a seam, you lay them to the front of your body so that you can put your hands in there and your hands are facing forward. If you did it to the back, your hands will be facing backwards when you put your hand in your pockets. So if those two are facing towards the front of your garment, the seam on the side, the seam under your armpit, it all needs to face that same way so that on the outside of your garment, those seams match up. So that's where I would sew to the front. So that's the side seam and the underarm seam will all, and the pocket seam will all be faced towards and sewn to the front. Next, let's talk about the materials and tools. So the materials and tools that we're going to use for this project includes a non-stretch fabric, lace tape, hook and loop or hook and eye, buttons, bias tape, a thread that will blend with your fabric, your sewing machine, of course, with a standard needle, your serger machine, if you have one. It is optional. In its place, if you don't have one, you can use a zigzag stitch. Scissors, fabric pins or clips, an iron, fabric chalk or pencils or both, a zipper foot, which should come with your machine, hand needles, and a 20-inch invisible zipper that matches your fabric. Okay, so now that we've discussed our plan and our materials and tools, let's jump right into our preparation. First, you want to go ahead and cut out your pattern pieces as stated in my previous video. If you need to review that video, it's going to be in the description below. So check that out. We're going to wash our fabric and dry it. The reason why we wash our fabric, and I just do a quick wash with no detergent to it, is so that we can get any contaminants off the fabric itself. We can also we're going to also dry that fabric so that we pre-shrink it. So if it's going to shrink, it's going to shrink before you cut into your fabric. That is very, very important. Otherwise, you're not going to get the size that you sewed in the finished garment. Before you lay your fabric out on your table, you want to make sure that you fold it the lengthwise. So the if this was your fabric on a bolt, you would fold it so that the top of the bolt, the top of the fabric that was on the top of the bolt is folded together. And you want to fold with your right sides together. That is how it's set up in most fabric or in most pattern instructions. Then you're going to go ahead and look at your instructions and place your pattern pieces in the way that they place them on the instructions. Don't pin them yet. Just lay them out the way they lay it out so you can know if you need to use more fabric, a whole different piece, or if it's not going to work as far as the way they have it laid out with you cutting is overlapping. Just make sure that it looks as closely as possible to the instructions, and then pin those pieces down. When you are cutting the fabric, cutting the pieces that are pinned down, you want to make sure that you leave the pattern attached to the fabric. That's going to keep your order for the next step. The next step is you transferring the markings from your pattern to your fabric, and you're going to do that in steps. Just take one piece at a time. Go ahead and transfer your markings, repin the pattern piece if you have to unpin it to make your markings so that you have that order. You can see the number on there. I don't draw the number on the fabric. You can also do that if you want to and you want to put away your pattern pieces, but I suggest that you just leave them attached and you take them off and put them away as you start to sew. Next, make sure your machines are cleaned. I try to clean my machines after every project. You're going to want to refer to your manual in the maintenance section to learn how to properly clean your machine. Never blow it out, like open up the panels and blow it out, because you can blow the pieces and the dust further into your machine where you can't clean them out. And lastly, let's load in our thread. You have to determine whether or not you want the same colored thread on the top or the bottom. I normally put the same color thread on the top and bottom because sometimes I might have to turn a piece upside down to sew it. And if I have a different thread on the bottom, then on the front of my garment, you'll see that different thread that I didn't mean to sew in there. It just won't match up with your finished product. All right, so remember that I always say in every sewing project, 90% of the project is preparation. The other 10% is sewing. So we are about to start sewing. So we're going to start with steps 1 through 3, which is the bodice. And we're going to do 3 things with the bodice. We're going to sew in the stay stitch. We're going to apply the lace tape. We're going to sew the front bodice and the back bodice together. So number 1, stay stitching. So you want to make sure that you're stay stitching from the shoulders to the middle center of the garment. You never want to just stay stitch all the way around. You are going to back stitch these stitches. These are different from base stitches. Stay stitches are there to stay in the garment the entire time. And it's usually around the collars because that's the thing that stretches out the most because you put your head through it. The collar is the first thing to stretch. So to prevent that from happening in a garment, you're going to put a stay stitch around the collar. Step 2 calls us to cut the lace tape to match the lines that were on the pattern. You should have already transferred over this marking. There are 4 lines that contain where the lace will go. You want to make sure that the lace, that you go ahead and pin the lace where the scalloped edge, meaning the edge that has the bumps, is faced away from the middle. Don't be afraid to overcut these. You should overcut these, meaning leaving a little bit of fabric or lace be on the lines that's on the bodice, because you can cut them after you sew them if you wanted them really close to the bodice, or you can just include them in the binding that we're going to put on there later. So cut them longer than the line, just by probably 1/4 of an inch. Step 3, you're going to take the back bodice pieces. There's 2. So this is piece number 2, and sew together with right sides facing each other to the front bodice piece, which is 1. And you're going to sew them on the shoulders and on the side seams for about 5/8 inch seam allowance. Once you're done combining those 2 pieces, I'm going to go ahead and serge those pieces at the shoulder and the side seams to clean up the seam. Okay, we're now going to work on the skirt portion from step 4 to step 9. The first thing that you want to do is with piece 5, which is the front skirt, you want to put in two sets of gather stitches, starting about 3/4 of an inch from the edge of the skirt at the top, on both sides. You also want to go ahead and gather pieces 6. So there's 2 6 pieces, and you want to make sure you put your gather stitches there, again, about 3/4 of an inch from the edge. That's a finger width. So if you put your finger down there, you can go ahead and start where your finger stops. When you're putting in your gather stitch, you want to make sure that you are opening up the length of your stitch, meaning choosing a stitch length that's the highest on your machine. So as far as you can go. My personal machine, I can only go to 4.5. My previous machine, though, I would be able to go to 5.0. So whatever the longest stitch length that you have on your machine, make sure it's set there. Also with gathers, you want to make sure that you have a good amount of tail before you start stitching of thread. So I would say probably about a good 5 inches of thread before you start, and leaving and cutting when you finish about 5 inches of thread. That way you can get a good grip on the gather. You don't want to back stitch with this stitch. This stitch is temporary. Once you finish putting in your gather stitches, you can go ahead and join the 2 6 pieces together at the back seam. You want to go ahead and start with the bottom, start at the bottom of the skirt and work your way up to the first notch, and don't go beyond that point. Reason being is this is a part of where the zipper is going to be. So you need that part open so that you can install that zipper and use the zipper to close up that seam. Number 6, we have to attach the pockets. So how you do that is with the piece 5 and 6 face where the right side is facing you, you're going to place the 4 pocket pieces in each corner at the top, matching where the dots are on the garment, with the right side of that fabric of piece 7 face towards the right side of your dress pieces or your skirt pieces. When you're going to go ahead and sew them down, you're going to pin them first and then sew them to a 3/8 inch stitch seam, so very close to the edge, because this is the first step in constructing the pockets. Once you have all 4 pockets aligned and sewn down with the 3/8 seam on each side, you're going to flip those pockets outward so that you see both right sides on both garments. And then you're going to go ahead and press that pocket open. Number 8 tells us to pin front to back at seams, matching large dots. Stitch side seams, leaving an opening between the large dots. Stitch pocket edge together from side seams to upper edge. So The first stitch that you're going to make is from the upper edge to the first dot down the dress on both sides. And then you're going to skip the space between the two dots and start stitching from the bottom of the second dot all the way down to the end of your garment on both sides. And then once you finish that, go ahead and pin your pockets together, and you can sew that big old swoop all the way around the pocket to where the last dot is, and then you're done constructing your pockets. You could turn it around and see how amazing that is. I love pockets. I love to install the pockets, and I do them the same way every time. Sometimes they're going to tell you to do it in a different way. I just default to the way that I know to do it. Number 9, you want to go ahead and clip the garment back seam allowance below the pocket. So below the pocket, there is a seam that we're going to leave pressed flat. You're going to clip right below the pocket so that seam can fully open up. Now, this was, I ended up serging the seam allowance under the pocket already by accident, though. I did not mean to pre-serge that part, but I did when I was pre-serging the zipper. Well, I did the wrong edge and then I had to go back and pre-serge where the zipper is going to lie. And my perfectionist attitude wouldn't allow me to just leave it there. So I plucked it all out and ended up having to re-serge the whole thing anyway. So that is something that I struggle with. But I make mistakes just like anybody else, and I just correct the mistakes. I'm just so used to going back and correcting mistakes. I didn't think far ahead that I would probably want to serge the edges of this seam because I end up having to do it anyways. Number 10, with the right sides together and the raw edges even, pin the skirt to the bodice at high waist seam, pulling up the gather stitches to fit, stitch break stitching at pocket, and then press the seam towards the bodice. So what this means is we're attaching the top of the dress to the skirt of the dress. So the best way to do that is to make sure that your skirt is on the wrong side of the fabric. Then, and your bodice is on the right side of the fabric, and you turn it upside down and pin it so that the right side of the bodice is facing the right side of the skirt. When you look back down into the skirt, you're going to see the bodice's wrong side. That's the position that you want to be in. Make sure you free up the pockets. Even though I made the mistake and did not free up the pockets, I sewed it right then and there, and I regretted it. Now, where you want to pin before you take up your gather is the front, the side seams, and where the back zipper is going to be. Those are only places that you need to pin to the bodice. Your gather stitches you're going to be able to gather those in sections. So the two backs, you're going to start there, gather up the two backs. Once your gathered skirt matches the bodice, then you go ahead and pin a couple times there because that's where you're going to sew. So do those two back in the back, then do the front. So do this side of the front to the middle, and then do this side of the front to the middle, and pin as you match up those sections. That's the best way to do it. Otherwise, if you're doing the whole front section, it's going to be a lot harder. You might even risk breaking your gather stitches. So just work in sections and it'll turn out great. Before you stitch the bodice to the skirt, make sure at that point, after you gathered, that you pin the pockets towards the front. And that way that stitch can go along that whole thing. Checking underneath as you're stitching so that you're not getting fabric underneath your stitches that you don't want there. And that make sure that your seam is in the right direction as you're stitching. So every time you come to a seam, check under to make sure that seam is facing the direction that you need to go. So now that we've attached our bodice to our skirt, we've gathered and we've attached the pockets going towards the front. We're going to work with the zipper. I'm not very good at zippers, but I'm getting better. I don't enjoy putting on zippers. But the easiest way to determine how to do your zipper is if your zipper has instructions. I've always found that the instructions on the actual zipper is more informative than the instructions on the pattern. I don't know why. I just like I can understand what it's saying better. We want to first start by measuring the zipper opening on your garment. You want to press about a 5/8 inch seam opening with your iron. Press it under. You're going to need that space to install the zipper. And then next, measure your zipper opening from the top minus 3/4 inch. You're going to start 3/4 inch from the top, measure that all the way to about a 1/2 inch past the opening that you created at the bottom. So then you're going to mark where on your zipper that is, because you're going to cut there and you're going to re-sew a stopper. So the zipper already has a metal stopper. So when we have to cut a zipper, we have to create another stopper. And you do that by just hand sewing across the teeth at that area that you want the zipper to stop at. Next, you're going to cut that excess zipper tape, toss that away, because we're going to apply the zipper to the dress. Your dress should be faced with the right size facing out on the back. Turn it around, and then you're going to open up your zipper all the way, and with the zipper face down, you're going to take that left strip and attach it to the right side of your garment opening. Make sure that you unfold where you had pressed under the 5/8 inch seam, and then pin that, just that left strip to that 5/8 inch seam. You're going to sew it all the way down with the zipper open. So once you hit the actual zipper, then that's where you stop. Then you will see that if you flip it to the right way, you will have that 5/8 inch seam allowance folded under, and you would attach the face of the zipper to the left side of your garment, and you'll see how that is only attached to the seam allowance. Now, in this instruction, they want you to stitch on the front of the fabric in the back. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to see the stitch down there, so I only stitched to the 5/8 inch seam that we pressed under, and I tacked at the waistline so that it won't fold back in. So it just looks cleaner on the outside. So that's how you do a zipper. I will do another full video just about how to attach the zipper. I'm still practicing though, so if you have any tips about that, please put them in the comments. All right, so we're done with the zipper. That's all sewn up. We're going to move on to attaching our ruffle around the collar and also binding the collar. So to begin the ruffle, with step 15 through 17, you're going to have to do some prep work for that piece. So you're going to press under a hem on the bottom and the sides only, not the top of the ruffle. Press under about a 1/4 inch, and I'm going to press the sides as well, and then stitch all the way around. Well, not all the way around, but along where I pressed. Once you have that stitched, you're going to go ahead and put in 2 rows of gather stitches. Again, leaving about 5 inches of thread on each side. Do not back stitch, and open up your stitch length to the furthest it can go. Step 16. On outside, pin the neck ruffle to the upper edge of the bodice, matching center, placing small dots at shoulder seams, pulling up gather stitching to fit base stitch, and then in a 1/2 of an inch stitch. basically, there's a couple things to note that makes this a lot easier. I only pin at both sides of the zipper and at the center front. I don't pin the shoulders because there's no seam there anyways to match up to, really. Like on the ruffle, there is shoulder seams, but that ruffle can lie anywhere on that garment on the side and be okay. It's harder if you pin at the shoulder seams, it's going to be harder to gather up that area. So, leave the pins out there and then go ahead and gather to the front center on both sides. Number 17, we're going to be applying the binding. So trim the upper edge of the zipper tape even to the neck edge. If necessary, apply binding to neck edge. So the if necessary is for the trimming of the zipper. If you have to trim it, then trim it. The binding is the bias tape. I made my own bias tape. I didn't like the binding that I got. It didn't match well with the dress. So I just used the same fabric that I used for the dress to make my bias tape. To make bias tape, all you do is cut about an inch and a half in width strip, the length of what your collar is going to be, and then fold it lengthwise in half, press that, and then with the two edges, fold them into the middle and press that. And you got your binding on the outside. I like to start sewing that one of the lips to the inside of the collar first. The reason being is so that I can stretch it over to the front and make sure that I'm covering that stay stitch that we stitched earlier. So if you do it the opposite way, which I've done a lot, and I was like, oh man, why did I do it this way? And I had to pick it all the way out and redo it. Do it on the inside so you can stretch that bias tape or your fabric over the outside, making sure that you extend it over the stay stitch that you put in there earlier. So we're moving on to our sleeves. That's going to be step 18 through 20. All right, so step 18, gather up edge of sleeve 4 between the notches. To make the pleats on outside, fold along the solid lines, bring folds to broken line, pin base stitch at a ½ inch from the raw edge. Let's go ahead and put in our gather stitches at the top between the two notches. Then you're also going to go ahead and complete your pleats. So at the bottom of the sleeve, you're going to see the markings that you transferred from your pattern piece. It's going to be a series of solid lines and dash lines. So the solid lines, you're going to just fold into the middle where the dash lines are. And each set has 2 solid lines and 1 dash line in the middle. You're going to do that for each set, pinning them as you go along. Once you have those all pinned, we can go ahead and put in a ½ inch base stitch. A base stitch is a temporary stitch, so you can put that about a ½ inch from the edge there, and we'll take that out later once we put on our bindings. Number 19 says stitch underarm seam, apply binding to lower edge of the sleeve. So once I finish putting in my base stitch, go ahead and fold it where right sides are together. Fold each sleeve, pin the seam to create the sleeve, and then go ahead and put in your permanent stitch 5/8 inch from the edge. Once you have that, you can apply your binding. Your binding is going to include that permanent stitch that's around the wrist of your sleeve. And then once you have that on there, then you can take out your temporary base stitch and it'll be pleated. The same goes for the binding here as it did for the collar. You're going to make your bias tape or apply your bias tape. Make sure that you fold in the ends so that it looks cleaned up. So you're going to make those 2 folds, well, the center fold and then the 2 folds on the side, and also a fold on the ends of each piece so that it won't be raw edges there. You're going to apply that binding to the bottom of the sleeve and move on to the next step. Number 20 explains how to attach the sleeve to the bodice. Turn the sleeve right sides out, hold dress wrong sides out with armhole towards you. With right sides together, pin the sleeve to the armhole edge. So you're gonna want to pin it at the shoulder seam and at the underarm seam. Leave the other two dots alone. Don't pin it there because, again, just like in the collar, gathering that whole thing, you're gonna have to move those pins anyway. So just leave them out. Go ahead and gather one side and then the other side. Once you have that in place, then you can go ahead and do your permanent stitch 5/8 inch from the edge. When you gather also, quick tip, make sure that as you, when you finish gathering, that you kind of spread out the gathers so that it's even. You won't see any gathers under the arm. You'll just see them around the top. All right, so now that we got our sleeves on, they look great. Let's move on to our hem. Step 21 calls for a narrow hem. You can do a couple different hems if you want to. If you're afraid that the skirt is too long, you can do a larger hem than that. What I'm going to do is go ahead and serge around the whole hem first and then make one narrow fold and stitch that so that I take care of my raw edges and make sure that they're not fraying. And I want to keep the length of this dress as long as possible. If you want, you can do a rolled hem down there if you don't have a serger, or you can do the zigzag stitch and then do what I did. Number 22 goes over some of the hand sewn items both of the hand sewn items that you're gonna have to do. So on the inside of your zipper opening, you're gonna have to go ahead and sew in your hook and eye. Your hook and eye is to close that gap between the zipper and the top of the dress. And also it just keeps the dress from unzipping. So you can hand sew those. You want to hand sew at the little holes at the bottom, at the end of the hook and eye. And also the hook itself, which I did not do. I don't know, I just didn't do it. And where the eye is, you can put in a couple stitches there. You don't need much stitching, just enough to hold it in place. And then also, now we're into our buttons. So in the view that we've chosen, you want to go ahead and sew your buttons straight in the line. A tip to doing that I found out while I was doing that, because I had to take them out and put them back in, and I just was not getting them straight, is I took a piece of Scotch tape and I lined them up on the Scotch tape, and then I put all the buttons at once on the front of the dress and hand sewn the buttons into place, and they came out perfectly. And then once I was done, I just pulled the tape off and there they are, just nice in a nice neat row. But it took a while for me to figure that out. so don't let it take a while for you to figure it out. The last thing that I added to this outfit, I wanted to add a head covering for this young girl that matches the dress. I got the pattern from a different pattern. I had to go out and buy it because I couldn't find a hat that I wanted in a pattern. So I did see the hat included in a costume pattern that I had to purchase for, gosh, I paid full price for it just to get this hat out, because I'm never going to sew the costume for what? Halloween? No, we don't celebrate Halloween. I'm just using the hat, which is a very cute popcorn puff hat that goes very well with this dress. The way to do that is there's 3 or 4 pieces. You're going to cut those pieces out. There's the circle at the top for the popcorn part. You're going to need the fabric that's facing outside, which I chose a stretch heavyweight fabric. And then for the inside, you need something soft and pliable like jersey, which I am using for the inside. They both kind of match. The inside is a little lighter than the outside, but I was luckily to find the color match for the dress. So that took a while though. It took a while for me to match the color, the light color that's in the pattern for the dress to contrast with the hat. So once you have those two pieces cut out, you're going to put them together and put 2 gather stitches along the whole circle, stopping at the notches. So you're going to have a total of 2 sets of gather pairs, which one at the top, 2 at the top, 2 at the bottom. And so you can so you don't have to gather the whole circle with 1 set of gather stitches. Once you got those in there, you're going to go ahead and put the interface onto piece 12 by ironing and fold that in half and stitch along the short edge of piece 12. Once you have that stitched in, you're just going to press open your seam and then fold it lengthwise, pin along the headband. So you're making a headband and you're going to pin the headband to the popcorn top where the seam is at the notches or at where you broke the gather stitches at. Once you have that pinned in with the headband's raw edges faced up, then you can go ahead and gather your popcorn hat to match the band. You pin, you sew around the headband, and then you cut the excess off in preparation of serging the seams or zipper stitching the seams. And then that's your whole hat. This is the whole outfit. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. Peace be. Thank you so much for joining me here on Modestly Made. I really do appreciate your support. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. If you have a topic that you want me to cover, definitely comment below. And I also have lives that I do every Thursday night at 7 p.m. I stream here on YouTube, and I also stream on Facebook. You can get some real-time advice, things that you don't know, things that you were curious about when it comes to sewing. I am there to answer all your questions. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Fresh Christian Clothing. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me here again. Peace be.